I never imagined I would inherit a mansion, especially not a Victorian one with such a storied past. But there I was, standing in front of the grand structure that had once served as a refuge for children during World War II. The plan was to convert it into a museum dedicated to those children. I brought my young son, Ethan, along. He was just as excited as I was, maybe more, about living in such an old, mysterious house. The moment we stepped inside, I felt a heavy presence, like the air was thick with the weight of untold stories. The grandeur of the mansion was still evident despite the layers of dust and the echo of footsteps that hadn't been heard in decades. Ethan quickly found an old teddy bear in surprisingly good condition, almost as if someone had just placed it there. That first night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I decided to explore a bit. I ended up in the attic, rummaging through old boxes. I found photos and letters from the children who had lived here during the war. Their faces were captured in black and white, smiling. But there was something unsettling in their eyes. One letter stood out. It described a night when all the children heard whispers coming from the walls. It sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off as an overactive imagination. The next few days were busy. We started the renovation process, and the workers arrived. They seemed uneasy, often glancing over their shoulders as if expecting to see something. I couldn't blame them. The mansion had that effect. One worker even swore he heard children laughing when no one else was around. I tried to focus on the project, but the house kept drawing me back to its past. Every creak, every unexplained noise made me think of the children who once filled these rooms. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still here, somehow. That night, Ethan woke up screaming, claiming he saw a boy standing at the foot of his bed. I rushed to comfort him, telling myself it was just a bad dream. As I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder what secrets the mansion was hiding and whether I was truly prepared to uncover them. It wasn't long before Ethan started talking about his new friends. First, I thought it was just his imagination. After all, we had just moved into a big old house, and it was only natural for a child to create imaginary friends in such an environment. But the more he talked about them, the more uneasy I felt. He spoke about Tommy and Becca as if they were real children he played with every day. One afternoon, while overseeing the renovations, I noticed something strange. Toys that I had never seen before were scattered around the house. They were old vintage toys, tin soldiers, a wooden train, a ragged doll that looked like they belonged to another era. I asked Ethan where he found them, and he simply said, "My friends gave them to me." The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, sent a shiver down my spine. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of laughter. It was unmistakably the laughter of children. I rushed to Ethan's room, and there he was, sitting up in bed, giggling and talking animatedly to the empty air. I asked him who he was talking to, and he replied, "Tommy and Becca. They wanted to play with me." I glanced around the room, my heart pounding. The walls were covered in childish drawings that hadn't been there before. Ethan insisted that his friends had helped him draw them. I started to get worried. Ethan was spending more and more time alone, or rather with his friends. He would talk to them at meals, in the bath, and even in his sleep. One day, I found him in the backyard, digging in the dirt. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was looking for a toy Tommy had buried there. Sure enough, after a few minutes of digging, Ethan pulled out a rusty old toy car, caked in dirt. I decided to do some research on the children who had lived in the mansion during the war. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. I found a few records and photographs in the local library. To my horror, I recognized Tommy and Becca in one of the old photographs. They were children who had lived in the mansion, but they had died tragically during an air raid. I started to piece together the story. It seemed that the spirits of these children were still lingering in the house, and for some reason, they had chosen to communicate with Ethan. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to leave the mansion and never look back, but another part of me felt a strange responsibility to help these lost souls. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I asked him more about his friends. He described them in great detail, their clothes, their voices, the games they liked to play. It was clear that he truly believed they were real. I didn't know what to believe anymore. As I turned off the light and closed the door, I heard Ethan whispering, "Good night, Tommy. Good night, Becca." The words echoed in my mind, making me question what was real and what wasn't. I knew I had to find out more. The house held secrets, and if I was going to protect Ethan and maybe even help these spirits find peace, I had to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. With Ethan's encounters growing more unsettling, I knew I needed help. I reached out to Mr. Thompson, a local historian known for his expertise on the town's history. When I told him about the mansion and the strange occurrences, he agreed to help. He seemed intrigued, though a bit skeptical. We met at the mansion one afternoon, and I showed him the photos and letters I had found. He studied them with a furrowed brow. "These children," he said, pointing to Tommy and Becca. "They were part of a group of evacuees sent here during the war. Many of them disappeared under mysterious circumstances." That revelation hit me hard. I had suspected something dark, but hearing it confirmed was chilling. Mr. Thompson and I decided to dig deeper into the mansion's history. We spent hours in the local library, sifting through old newspapers and town records. What we found was disturbing. There were reports of strange rituals and seances conducted by a man named Harold, who had worked as a caretaker at the mansion. He believed he could protect the children from the horrors of the war by performing these rituals. According to the reports, the children started acting oddly, claiming to see things and hear voices. Eventually, some of them vanished without a trace. Harold was arrested but never convicted due to lack of evidence. He disappeared shortly after his release, and the mansion had been abandoned for years. As we uncovered more, the activity in the mansion escalated. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I heard footsteps echoing through the halls. I followed the sound, heart pounding, and found myself in the basement, a place I had avoided until now. There, hidden behind a false wall, was a small room. It was filled with old, dusty objects, candles, books, and symbols drawn on the floor. This had to be Harold's ritual room. Mr. Thompson arrived, and together we examined the room. We found a diary that detailed Harold's attempts to contact the spirit world. He wrote about the children, about their fear and confusion, and how he believed he could save them by binding their spirits to the house. My stomach churned as I realized the implications. The children's spirits were trapped here, possibly tormented and unable to move on. That night, as the storm raged outside, the mansion seemed alive with activity. Shadows flickered across the walls, and I could hear the faint sound of children crying. I rushed to Ethan's room and found him sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. "They're here," he whispered. "Tommy and Becca. They're scared." I held him close, trying to calm him, but I felt a cold presence around us. The room grew icy, and the whispering grew louder. I knew we couldn't stay there. I had to find a way to release these spirits and protect my son. The next day, Mr. Thompson and I continued our research. We discovered a ritual that could potentially free the spirits, but it required precise timing and specific items. We would need to perform it on the next full moon, which was only a week away. I was terrified but determined. I couldn't let the spirits continue to haunt Ethan, and I felt a growing responsibility to help the children find peace. As the day of the ritual approached, the mansion became more oppressive. I saw glimpses of the children out of the corner of my eye and heard their voices calling out for help. It was clear they were trapped in a nightmare, reliving their final moments over and over. I gathered the necessary items for the ritual and prepared myself for what lay ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and there were risks involved, but I had to do it for Ethan, for the children, and for the peace of the mansion. The spirits needed to be freed, and I was their only hope. The days leading up to the ritual were some of the most harrowing of my life. Ethan's nightmares grew worse, and he began sleepwalking, always heading towards the basement. Each time, I would find him standing in front of the hidden room, whispering to someone unseen. It was like the spirits were trying to draw him in. One night, I woke to find Ethan gone from his bed. Panic set in as I raced through the dark corridors of the mansion, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. I found him in the basement again, staring at the old symbols on the floor, his eyes glazed over. "They need our help, Mom," he said in a voice that wasn't entirely his own. It was deeper, more mature. Chilled me to the bone. I pulled him away, holding him tightly. As we left the basement, I heard a low growl behind us, and the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Whatever was in that room didn't want us meddling. The next day, I reached out to Mr. Thompson again, desperate for guidance. He arrived with more research and a grim look on his face. "The spirits are getting desperate," he said. "They know we're close to freeing them, but something is fighting back. Possibly Harold's spirit, or something even darker." As we prepared for the ritual, strange things began happening more frequently. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered, and cold spots appeared throughout the mansion. Ethan's invisible friends were becoming more demanding, and he spoke of them constantly, even during his waking hours. He told me they were scared and needed to be set free, but there was something else, something that didn't want them to leave. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, all the pots and pans flew off the shelves and crashed to the floor. Felt like a warning. Later, while putting Ethan to bed, he looked at me with fear in his eyes. "They say he's coming," he whispered. "The bad man." My heart sank. It had to be Harold. I knew we were running out of time. The night of the full moon arrived. Mr. Thompson and I set up the ritual in the basement, carefully arranging the items and drawing the protective symbols. Ethan stayed close to me, holding onto my hand tightly. I could feel his small body trembling. We began the ritual, chanting the words we had found in Harold's diary. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy. Shadows danced around us, and the sounds of children crying filled the room. Ethan clung to me, his eyes wide with fear. Halfway through the ritual, the hidden door burst open, and a dark figure stood in the doorway. It was Harold, or at least what was left of him. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and he started towards us, his presence radiating anger and hatred. Mr. Thompson shouted for me to continue the chant, but my voice faltered as Harold reached out towards Ethan. I had to protect my son. With a surge of determination, I resumed the chant, louder and more forceful. Harold screamed, a terrible sound that reverberated through the mansion. The symbols on the floor began to glow, and the spirits of the children appeared around us, their faces filled with fear and hope. They reached out, their voices blending with mine as we completed the final lines of the chant. With a blinding flash of light, Harold was thrown back, his form disintegrating into nothingness. The children's spirits began to dissipate, their expressions turning peaceful as they finally found release. The mansion fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. I collapsed to the floor, holding Ethan tightly as he sobbed into my shoulder. We had done it. The spirits were free, and the mansion was finally at peace. In the days that followed, the house felt different. The atmosphere was lighter, and the strange occurrences stopped. Ethan returned to being a normal, happy child, his imaginary friends now just a distant memory. I continued with my plan to turn the mansion into a museum, dedicating it to the memory of the children who had lived and died there. It was my way of honoring them and ensuring their stories would never be forgotten. The mansion was no longer a place of terror, but a place of remembrance and peace. After the terrifying encounter with Harold's spirit, I knew we had only one chance to get this right. The full moon was just days away, and everything had to be perfect. Mr. Thompson and I gathered all the necessary items for the ritual: candles, salt, sacred herbs, and the diary pages with the chants. As the day approached, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The activity slowed, as if the spirits were waiting, hopeful but anxious. Ethan and I prepared as best we could, trying to keep a semblance of normalcy. But the tension was palpable. Every creak, every unexpected sound set us on edge. The night before the full moon, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the flickering candlelight, lost in thought. Ethan appeared at my side, clutching his teddy bear. "Mom, will they be okay?" he asked, his voice small and worried. I pulled him onto my lap, hugging him tightly. "I hope so, sweetheart. We're going to do everything we can to help them." Mr. Thompson arrived the next afternoon. We spent hours going over the ritual, making sure we knew every step by heart. There could be no mistakes. As the sun set, we moved to the basement, setting up the ritual space. The air was heavy with anticipation. Ethan stayed close to me, his eyes wide with both fear and determination. He seemed to understand the gravity of what we were about to do. We drew protective symbols on the floor, arranged the candles, and placed the sacred herbs around the room. Everything was ready. As the moon rose, we began. The chants were rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The temperature dropped, and I felt a familiar chill as the spirits gathered. Shadows danced along the walls, and I could hear faint whispers, as if the children were encouraging us. Partway through the ritual, the atmosphere shifted. A dark presence filled the room, and I knew Harold was trying to stop us. Ethan gasped, clutching my hand tighter. I could see a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the circle of light cast by the candles. Mr. Thompson's voice wavered, but he kept chanting, and I joined in, louder and more determined. Harold's figure became more distinct, his eyes glowing with anger. He stepped closer, reaching out as if to break through our circle of protection. In that moment, I felt a surge of resolve. Couldn't let him win. I chanted louder, focusing all my energy on the words. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, and the candle's flames flickered violently. The spirits of the children appeared, their faces filled with a mix of fear and hope. They reached out, their hands blending with the light. Harold screamed, a sound that echoed through the mansion. The air crackled with energy, and I felt a force pushing against us, trying to break our concentration. But we held firm. The light from the symbols intensified, surrounding Harold and the children's spirits. With one final, deafening cry, Harold's form shattered, dissolving into nothingness. The children's spirits began to fade, their expressions peaceful. The oppressive weight that had hung over the mansion lifted, leaving a calm, serene atmosphere. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Ethan hugged me tightly, tears streaming down his face. "We did it, Mom. We helped them." In the days that followed, the mansion felt transformed. The heavy, eerie atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. Ethan no longer mentioned his imaginary friends, and the strange occurrences ceased entirely. Mr. Thompson and I continued our work, turning the mansion into a museum dedicated to the children who had lived there. It became a place of remembrance and healing, a tribute to those young lives lost during a dark time in history. As we opened the museum to the public, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had not only freed the spirits trapped within the mansion, but also created a space where their stories could be told and remembered. The mansion, once a place of fear, had become a beacon of hope and remembrance. The night of the ritual had left us all drained, but there was a sense of accomplishment that carried us through the following days. The mansion, which once felt oppressive and foreboding, now seemed almost welcoming. The air was lighter, and the eerie silence was replaced by the normal sounds of an old house settling. The morning after the ritual, I woke up feeling a peace I hadn't felt since we moved in. Ethan was in the kitchen, eating breakfast with a big smile on his face. "Mom, I had a good dream," he said, his eyes shining with happiness. Tommy and Becca were happy. They said thank you. I felt a lump in my throat as I hugged him. The change in Ethan was immediate and profound. The nightmares were gone, and he no longer mentioned his invisible friends. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, allowing the sun to finally shine through. Mr. Thompson continued to visit, helping me with the transformation of the mansion into a museum. We cataloged the old toys, photographs, and letters, creating exhibits that told the story of the children who had lived there. Each item was a piece of history, a testament to the lives that had been touched by war and tragedy. As we worked, we discovered more hidden compartments and secret rooms within the mansion. Each discovery was like peeling back layers of a forgotten past. We found more letters from the children, some hopeful, some filled with fear. These became central pieces of our exhibit, giving visitors a glimpse into the lives of the children who had once called the mansion home. The official opening of the museum was an emotional day. People from the community came to see the exhibits, to learn about the history that had been hidden for so long. Many were moved to tears, especially those who had family ties to the children who had stayed in the mansion during the war. I gave a speech, thanking everyone for their support and sharing a bit about our journey. I kept the details of the supernatural encounters to myself, knowing that the focus should be on the children and their stories. Ethan stood beside me, holding my hand, his eyes wide with pride. As the days turned into weeks, the museum became a place of learning and reflection. School groups visited regularly, and I often found myself sharing stories with the children, emphasizing the importance of remembering and honoring the past. One evening, as I was closing up, I felt a familiar chill. For a moment, I was worried that the spirits had returned, but then I heard a soft, familiar voice. "Thank you." I turned, and for a brief moment, I saw the faint outline of Tommy and Becca, smiling. They looked peaceful, content. Tears filled my eyes as I realized that they had come to say goodbye. I whispered, "You're welcome," and watched as they faded away, finally free. The mansion had changed us all. It had been a place of terror and sorrow, but now it was a place of remembrance and peace. I knew that the spirits of the children were finally at rest, and their stories would continue to live on through the museum. Ethan and I settled into our new routine, our lives forever changed by our experiences. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, our bond unbreakable. The mansion, once a place of nightmares, had become a home filled with history, love, and light. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, and comment, and check out the next story. What do you think about the idea of spirits being tied to places? Have you ever experienced anything supernatural? If you like this story, please subscribe, like, and comment, and check out the next story.